Okay, let's get started. We now have a panel discussion on developer career progression. I'll let Samathy introduce the panel, but let's start with a big round of applause.
Hello. So first of all, I'll introduce the panelists that we have in front of us today. First of all, I'm going to start with Jess Rose, if you want to wave at the audience.
What's the audience? Quite.
Jess is a mentor to many people, a keystone in the tech community. She's currently a technical manager for FutureLearn, an ex-developer relations person. She's always trying to get people into tech and trying to make the field better for everyone. If you want to hear more of her rambling, you can hear it on the Pursuit podcast, which is very good. I recommend it. Her pronouns are she. It's Jess Rose. I'm going to go with Christian Glass next. A lover of founding organizations, Christian is CTO at LaterPay, ex-head of Moorhen Solutions and co-founder of both the PYCON UK Society and the UK Python Association. He uses he pronouns. Do I smell burning? It's Christian Glass. Next up is Michelle Coventry. With a taste for talent, Michelle finds people to do great things. Currently working at Kindred Capital and autonomous car company 5AI. She has over 16 years experience in hiring tech teams with she pronouns and my birthplace for her surname. It's Michelle Coventry. And last on the panel there, we have a technologist with a passion for awesome people, currently CTO at Moo, the print company, who are just outside. Mary has worked at places ranging from Procter & Gamble to government digital companies. She uses she pronouns. It is Mary Williams. So I'm going to start with a question that we've had from the audience earlier. Panelists, if you could give your younger self advice, maybe a few years ago, what would that advice be?
Who's taking that one? Do you want to go first? Because it's going to be fire related.
So, I guess past me was an idiot in a lot of ways, even more so than I am now. Past me thought that technology was what mattered most and massively undervalued people. And yeah, that's people. People matter so much. The people skills, the working with people, the how people feel matters as much, if not more, than the tech you're using and how you're building things. I wish I'd learned that earlier.
Sure. Younger self. Probably, if I was 5, I would have said start Python, probably. I've dabbled in code. I think I've got an incredible role right now, and I learn from each and every one of you every single day. So I continue to learn, and I would probably just keep doing great work and keep getting known for that. But probably communication skills. So you can be a really awesome programmer, and you still may not get hired if you can't share and communicate, collaborate, and bring other people into your world. Yeah, that's probably a piece of advice. I'd give myself start coding. Yeah.
So I'm old enough that the advice I'd give my younger self is not to believe everybody when they said all the dev work was going to get offshored. I worked in a bunch of places where they genuinely believed that was happening, and so probably ended up moving into other roles because the work was going away in a way that I think just hasn't turned out to be true. So don't trust Gartner is probably the advice I'd give my younger self. It's probably the advice I'd give my current self as well, just for the record for anybody in the room.
For me, it would probably be advice to be a lot less careful. When I first started out in tech, I was like, oh, I can't say this or I can't do that. No one cares. Is this being videotaped?
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as nobody's videotaping you, do what's in your heart without being a jerk. this might be very gendered advice as well, but if I go back far enough, don't waste my time with romantic partners who won't let me prioritize the things I want to, let me, Jesus.
It's all coming out.
Wow, I gotta go back in time and have some words with like younger me. Yeah, don't make space in your life for folks who don't value your goals.
It's like life advice rather than career advice. But it's
I
good
mean, like,
advice.
career-wise, she was doing okay, but like, oh, baby Jess, like.
Thank you very much. Just like to remind the audience, although I have some questions here, we are inviting questions from the audience. I'd rather not have your own stories, but if you feel the need to ask a question, raise your hand and we will have a mic runner come around. But the next question from me here, if you want to progress your career in technology, is it better to change your job to move upwards or sideways maybe? Or is it better to stay and try and progress your career within the organization you currently work in?
Shall I start?
I mean, like, one of us is, this is going to be a very polite argument, which should stay polite.
So I don't think you should ever stay anywhere unless you're learning, and you should know why you're staying. But I think that's also true if you're moving. I probably have seen people who move very well, so they're moving to a new challenge, something that's going to grow them, and they're getting the pay rise that goes with that, or the title change that goes with that. I've also seen people think that they have to move every 18 months, so they move because like the clock has hit 18 months, and they do the same job 5 jobs in a row, and they don't grow, and they don't develop, and they're not actually growing the skills. Like, it's the whole thing of, I've got 5 years experience. Do you have 1 year experience 5 times, or do you have 5 years experience? So is your experience additive? And I think that's the more useful question, is are you going to grow the most and learn the most and be rewarded the best by staying or by going? Obviously, I lead big tech teams. I aspire to build the kind of places where people can stay and grow. But rather than it just being I think that the kind of moving too frequently is interpreted wrong by people. The reason to do it is because you're gaining experience or gaining an opportunity rather than just because the clock has ticked, right? But I think that there's data that Jess will talk about that's also worth taking into consideration.
Love data. If your only consideration is your salary, and I'm not saying your only consideration should be your salary, but if your only consideration is growing your salary, staying in any role for more than 3 years can often be challenging. I'm absolutely not saying that your salary should be your only thing you care about. And this is especially dangerous advice for underrepresented people who could very, very easily get into workplaces that are toxic and very, very challenging to operate in. If you only care about your salary and you just want to grow that, feel free to go ahead and change your job every 1.5 years, 2 years. Statistically, that can be the best way to grow it. Is it weird? Who here, either by hands or raised eyebrows, manages or employs people? Fantastic. Please look ashamed if you're not giving people market raises every year. I can't tell if y'all are ashamed or just like super British. The warning there for employers is that everyone is aware that changing roles is how you grow your salaries or how you make big promotions if there's not space internally. If you're not making room for people, this is what it's going to cost you.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that moving doesn't necessarily, for some of you it will be moving outside to another company, but if you are a manager and you do hire people, moving people into a company or into a different part of the organization to work on a different problem statement is something that if I'm sitting on the other side of the table looking at someone's CV and their experience and they haven't shown progression throughout, whether that's internally or externally, and reaped the rewards, all of the different types of rewards according to that, then I'd probably raise an eyebrow.
No, that's really fair.
Yes, I've definitely suffered myself from perhaps not moving as frequently as I should have, but I think it's easy to forget how scary and traumatic moving can be, even when you're a white dude in tech, let alone if you're talking about the dangers of underrepresented groups. Now it's even harder. White boy in tech, it's scary for me, but at the same, so I'm giving people this advice to move more because lots of the people around me I see are more likely to stay far too long for feelings of loyalty or because just the plain difficulties and how hard it is to move. But it's hard for me to internalize as well.
Yeah. I think in some ways, if you're in a good organization where there's opportunity to grow, it's like choosing to stay in the language that you're really comfortable with coding or to move, right? You get some benefits from being in an environment where you know how to get stuff done, you know who the people are, you know how to navigate. The people I worry about the most are probably ones who move every like 6 to 9 months, because it kind of shows that every time they figure out how to get something done, then they bail, which either means they don't like delivering things, or as soon as they know the people around them, they decide they hate them and they're out. And maybe they've just made a bunch of like, they have found like douchebag nest after douchebag nest, so through some terrible set of circumstances, but that super frequency, because people do get productive after a certain amount of time by having learned it, same as when you got your whole setup done and you got your build, all your CI figured out and everything else, you can be much more productive in the day-to-day. The same is kind of true at the people and team interaction level too.
Cool, thank you. So we talked a bit about changing jobs or staying, but if somebody chooses the option to stay, but they're still looking to go upwards from a developer position, if they're looking to head into senior developer or manager, what sort of things should they choose, or are there other ways that they can go?
Rock, paper, scissors?
Yeah, Mary should definitely start here.
Sorry?
Mary, you should definitely start here.
Okay, cool. So I suppose I firmly believe that that for technologists, management is a career change. It's not a progression. And if you work somewhere where the only way up, the only progression is into management, then have some proper conversations with people there and help them to realize that that's not healthy. There should always, and the last few organizations I've been in, everywhere I've been, part of what we do is to put a proper career plan in place, career path in place, where there's an opportunity to stay an individual contributor like engineer, whether it's an engineer or ops engineer or a test engineer. There should be a way of becoming more senior without having to take on people management responsibilities, but also whilst continuing to like ship stuff in a team or in a couple of teams. I think architect is a different role. I think that tech lead means wildly different things by different organizations and could be a whole other question, a whole other answer, so I'll avoid it for the second. But management is a different skill set, and we are, as technologists, probably in one of the functions or disciplines where our early years in our careers don't necessarily give us the skill set that then adapts us well for that move into mostly looking after people rather than mostly looking after code. And so recognize it for being a change in direction or a change in career, and needing a whole bunch of investment in a skill set that you may or may not have developed to this point, but also be wary of places where the only way up is into management. I don't think it's a healthy thing for technologists, and I think for years we've seen some of the really big technology companies starting to have staff engineer, principal engineer kind of positions and paths, and to value that deep expertise as a separate way of developing in your career from developing kind of broader management type skill set.
Yeah, very similar, except mine would be, again, trying to remember who were managers and hires and fuss at them. If you're running a team or running a company where you're requiring your best engineers to get out of engineering to progress, that's like super dumb. Not a good business. No, it's super dumb. It's not exceptionally professional. Make sure that you have a clear career progression that tries to reduce bias, that you've got explicit, if you have these competencies, let's have a discussion about moving up to the next level. Have different names for those levels so that there is status assigned to them. But make sure you're not, it makes about as much sense to take a great engineer and throw them into management as it does to take a great engineer and throw them suddenly into sales. Like, it's a completely different skill set, and I'm not sure how we ever got in this habit.
I think someone who's interviewed tens of thousands over my many years, I've probably only ever been asked the question, a handful of times about career progression, and this is how you're interviewing for a new role in a new company potentially, and it's up to you to ask these questions to see, not only am I going to be working on interesting, within a great environment, and they're going to support me to do my best work here, but you own your career. I don't. These guys, these folks don't. So you have to be asking these, and I've been spoiled to work in some really great environments, and they've all had career paths or career rubrics that you can actually say, so if I start here, then I could end up there or there, and you'll have a great management structure that will help you as an individual navigate that path. And if they don't have that in place, that's probably a red flag, but it's kind of up to you, I would say, grab that as part of your interview process.
Even as an established employee, so many companies that have built out these rubrics have them available publicly.
Yeah.
So GDS has a great one. Rent the Runway, absolutely love theirs.
Etsy, they're all, just Google it. And
you've got the opportunity to bring that to your manager and be like, hey, look what other companies are doing. Just bring them the one you like the best, the one that would get you a raise. Be like, hey, can we just adopt this?
Yeah, I think the Rent the Runway rubric in particular has just had a massive effect. I've mostly worked with smaller companies or early stage startups where career progression is
something that
at some point will make up a different title for you and hopefully pay you more.
Yeah.
And everyone's a senior developer at first as they get hired.
No, everyone's a CTO whenever they
I know.
No, don't even get me started on title bloat. No, sorry. Really. But I think in startups they don't have
director of.
It's exactly that. It's a very weird situation in the early stages. Things like publishing those things, publishing the career ladders has been brilliant because now it's an easier thing for a small company, for a startup to do. Yeah. And now you can have levels, now you can actually provide some progression that I think I haven't felt like I've been seeing before. Hence you get the title weirdness, hence you get the let's job hop more because there's not that progression.
Yeah.
Camille Fournier was CTO at Rent the Runway at the point they published that. She did a fantastic talk called Cloning Yourself Isn't an Option, about how as you move more into technical leadership, you have to become a multiplier of others. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend watching it because it's very good context for that career path that's then published.
Fab. So we've got a question down at the front here.
Hello.
Hello.
I have a question about interviewing. You can respond this question in a different way. So what is your best method or question on interviewing new candidates? Or if you want to, what is the characteristic that you're looking for new hires that you don't see a lot?
Samathy, do you want to pick which question we're answering?
Yeah, let's go with new hires. What are the characteristics of new hires that you would like to see but don't see very often?
So at FutureLearn, I'm really lucky. We've spelled out 5 specific competencies that we'd like to see, specifically from developers, but we often see them in other ways. And one of them is technical skill, but things like communication, willingness to learn, willingness to help each other. So I think sitting down before you interview, and I promise, whether or not you know it, somebody's already written down your company's core values, and it's like in a Google Doc somewhere that hasn't been opened in 3 years. Have a look at that, because oftentimes what it says you value are a fantastic leaping off point to say, like, okay, great humans, that's a value, I suppose. What are we saying here? Do we need people who are able to communicate clearly? Do we want lifelong learners? What is it we actually want day to day? And then explicitly write those down and build your interview questions from there.
Yeah, it never fails to surprise me how many companies, how many interviewers go into interviews with I'm just going to ask some questions. I'm going to see what they do. I hope this works out well. It amazes me how much, whether or not they have explicit values. Because pulling out explicit values can be hard, exactly as you say. They're often 3 years out of date. Somebody wrote some things down in a Google Doc.
But very on brand, good colors.
Yeah, good colors. It's all about the colors. But even just a structured interview is often an incredible novelty at places.
So I'm always amazed that for such a data-driven industry, we do so much on gut feel. If you're interviewing 5 people and you ask them all different questions, you're just hiring the person you like best. have standardized questions, have ways you score the answers, have those be transparent, have those be things you discuss with other interviewers.
But the question was, what are we looking for in new hires?
Oh, sorry, yes, we've gone.
Whoops.
Yeah.
Tangent.
I think it's people who are looking for roles in the audience,
Oh,
looking
yes.
for advice,
Yes.
rather than managers looking to be given advice.
Try and
Christian,
interview
what do you
places like
list?
that.
So I think there's a good follow-on question that we had earlier that leads into this. What advice do you have for people that have diverse experience that maybe doesn't fit into traditional technology roles like testers or developers or that kind of thing? And how might somebody with those skills, how might having those skills and maybe not having traditional skills affect their potential to go into traditional developer, tester, project manager?
Rip it all apart. Take everything you've done and rip it all apart and go, what are the consistent threads of usefulness in here? You asked, what's your favorite interview question? My favorite interview question is, what can't you stop yourself doing even when it's not your job?
It's a really good one.
And it teaches me a ton about who you are and what you value and what your compulsions are, let's be honest, and what you're going to be great at. And that shows up in people who've had really interesting, wildly different experience. There are these core, to use a corporate term, core competencies, core things they're good at that have shone through in them. And sometimes they found out what they don't like by doing a role, and sometimes they found out what they do like by doing a role. But when I was first interviewing for my first tech jobs, my previous roles had been bouncer, bodyguard for Bristol City Football Club's chairman, which I'll tell you all about later if you want to know, and bartender and event runner for weddings in the Midlands. Not that there's anything wrong with the Midlands, just that the particular wedding venue was interesting in a number of ways, which I can tell. But you can find stuff in that experience that speaks to what people are looking for in the role. And so for anybody who worries that because they didn't have the right title at some point along the way, I wouldn't worry about that at all, but I would figure out how to write your CV or your application in a way that pulls out those skills that you gained and how they were useful. I've had people successfully interview for an internship program where there were 20,000 applications every year and 100 spaces, and people who, because the way they talked about their shelf stacking job at Tesco showed that they saw some of the problems and suggested ways to improve things and found the most efficient route round to stack the shelves most effectively, they were a stronger candidate than somebody else who had been captain of 3 sports teams and had all this kind of university leadership experience, because they were able to show that they could actually analyze and solve problems. I feel like there's more questions out there, so I'm going to shut up.
Very quickly to leap off of yours.
There's 2 at the back there, Nick.
Hi, I just wanted to ask what your, on the subject of attracting talent, what your experience has been with, say, utilising commercial recruitment agencies, whether there's only value of using them in the past, and how the recruitment industry can evolve in terms of attracting the right sort of people you need to your separate organisations.
Hang on,
So,
ask one question. We can't answer 6. What's the one question?
what your experience has been like with using recruitment agencies and whether there's only value in doing that, basically.
Michelle, do you want to take this?
So I've scaled a whole bunch of teams from like sub 10 folks all the way through to 150, and I've met a whole bunch of recruitment agencies up and down the country and internationally, and sometimes you'll find someone who really gets, if you're able to give them the tools to articulate your proposition as you would, and you treat them like they're going to be an extension of your own team, then let them go amplify that message more than you will, because guess what? You'll have meetings, you'll be in interviews, and they can speak to 20 to 30 engineers a day. And if you trust them, I think there is value in some relationships. Unfortunately, historically, over the last 10 years, I mean, I've been on both sides of the fence, and there's spiders out there. The minute you put your job live, that you're already getting 10 recruiters that are already spamming you with CVs along with our terms, so that you can't even touch the keyboard without getting an invoice of 10, 15 grand. So I would just I would work with recruiters, and I would work with a really small number of trusted partners, but make sure that I use data a lot too, is ensure that they're performing, just like you'd expect anyone else. But I wouldn't necessarily not say no, not ever. I'd be more concerned with some of the platforms that are coming up, left, right and centre, and to Jess's point about people moving and retention, I think we're starting to see some of these platforms where you can engage directly with and circumvent the recruiter. Sometimes that can create an element of, or rather the experience on both sides is not great. It's early days yet, but it can also promote job hopping and moving constantly. And I'd be interested to see how that sort of pans out over the next couple of years.
I think it can be frustrating as well, because a lot of those platforms seem to only test for your comfort using the platform. So the ones where they're like, oh, I'm trying to think of a way to say it without saying it. Rank your hacker skills. There we are. Only really tests for your ability to use that platform and comfort on it. It's not saying anything about your competency as a developer.
And I think just some of the names of these, if you look back at when they were incorporated, they were called things like auction.com. And I don't know about you, but I would never put myself and my career on a website that would
Auction me.
auction me. I mean, it sounds wrong in the modern world to even have that going on. But having said that, if you're on the other side, I mean, one of the things that previously that I've worked with Mary on is when we started working together, we were working with a small number of recruiters, and then what you found that over the 7-8 months is that your sort of cost per hire would actually decrease. I think it was £9 through to 1, because you're doing more and more with the community, and actually your brand is getting out there as being a really great place to work, and slowly your reliance on recruiters starts to diminish. But I wouldn't necessarily say no, not ever.
Okay. So we had another question at the back, and then David at the front.
Hi. This is technically could be directed at something Jess said, but it extends to the whole panel. So Jess, you stated at the beginning that one of the things that you would advise your younger self is to not be so careful. And I find that this is, from my experience, I find that many developers go through that kind of growth stage, whether it's to stop being intimidated at this the open-ended, daunting engineering problems or something more personal. So could you share the concrete experiences or one of the concrete experiences that you had that made you think this way, that made you think that this is an essential piece of advice?
For me personally, I was being very careful to be very nice all the time. Are we allowed to swear up here? Even when people were extremely unpleasant and unprofessional. And I got to the point where I had been in the industry for a little while, and I think about the fifth speaker dinner where somebody asked whose wife I was, I responded with some words. And there was no repercussions for that. It was great. So I think that being good to other people in the industry is fantastic, but I think that giving up too much of yourself to accommodate for other people's bad activities isn't really necessary. I think as long as you're not out there hurting people, if you make mistakes, no one's going to notice it as much as you do.
Okay. Would anyone else like to take that question further, or on the panel here?
I mean, it was like, Jess, what specifically in
Yeah,
your background asked
like
you to...
I cussed out a guy and it was fine.
Cool.
Oh yeah.
So, do we have anything that would make us tell our younger selves to be less careful? I mean, I had the opposite problems. I'm South African, and I like to joke that we had 300 years of Dutch rule and 100 years of British rule, so we're very direct and then a little apologetic about it. And so I had the opposite problem of being fresh off the boat here, being over direct, and people struggling with that a lot. And I got a lot of early coaching or career advice or whatever that just sounded a lot like people telling me to not be myself, and I struggled with how to take that. And then my kind of breakthrough moment was one of the really senior directors at Procter & Gamble, who I have a huge amount of respect for. She's very Glaswegian. She went to Strathclyde Uni. She's the first person in her family ever to go to university, and so was from a similar kind of working class background to me. And she gave me that same feedback in a very different way, which was, when you act like this, it feels like you're just trying to prove that you're smarter than everybody else in the room, and it makes other people feel bad. And I was like, fuck. I didn't mean, that's not what I meant. That's not what I intended. And that was the first time that I was like, oh, okay, this is feedback on my behavior and how it makes other people feel, not on me and what my culture is. Because, like, or, you know, what my cultural background or my, I suppose, my orientation, because some of it's about butchness as well, right? And that was the first time that I was able to be like, okay, I can separate who I am from this behavior. And I think that's probably the more useful thing, is help people give you advice you can take by them either recognizing when they're different from you, and so just telling you what they would do is not going to work for you, or to help guide them to tell you more about what you're doing and what impact it's having, rather than who you are or what your character is like or your personality is like.
Should we take a question from the front here?
How can we help people who have had sort of gaps in their developer career progression, either because they've done a career change into management and now want to get back into development, or because they've taken some time off work altogether because kids or whatever, or the like? Either hiring or like once we've hired them.
We actually had a great question from the audience that follows into that really nicely. So maybe if you could incorporate how somebody who needs to go on maternity leave, how that might affect their career as well.
So personally, I don't feel like gaps matter. I think gaps are viewed as, unfortunately, viewed as more of a bad thing than they actually should be. But a lot of skills I've seen don't necessarily okay, so you might not be up to date on the latest JavaScript framework. But fundamentally, the core skills you've built up and developed, they're still going to be with you. And to tie it into what was said earlier, tell people what you bring to the table. So maybe you switched out, you tried a career in something different, that didn't work out, you've come back. You'll have gained things from that. You'll have gained a whole set of different perspectives, a whole set of different skills. That's still valuable experience. It may not be the same experience that sort of ticks standardized boxes on those kind of occasionally dreadful interview and application processes we get. But in terms of concrete benefit, a lot of those gaps will give you benefit, and when they don't, I don't think it's a problem, or it shouldn't be viewed as that.
I have a friend, I agree completely. I have a friend who says the thing they hate the most about job interviews is it makes them try to organize their life experience into a coherent narrative that they believe, because they don't believe that their life is a coherent narrative that they designed, which is fair. But I think that's probably the advice I'd give is, I don't think it's ever a problem to have a gap or to have gone and done something different. I think that as in organizations, we have to create the space for people to stay current. We're in an industry that changes a lot, and so if you expect people to do all of their staying current in their personal time, that's bullshit, and it's excluding people from the industry who we need. And so we have to build that space and time into projects people are working on, or time out to help it. One of the first questions asked new people I'm managing is, how do you prefer to learn? And for some folks that's going to a conference, and for some folks that's having a day every now and again where they work from home and read a frickin' book, and that's how they learn best, and getting that. So I think build time and space into staying current, into regular roles, value the experience. But when you're interviewing, when you're writing your CV, you kind of do have to try and make it be a coherent narrative that explains your life choices, even if some of them are inexplicable. So figure out how you talk about it. Don't be apologetic about it. Just figure out how you talk about it, and take some friends or some people you trust through that narrative of how you tell the story. Like I have no problem at all with somebody who I've had people recently who they took time out because they had a chance of getting into the Olympics squad, and so they just went, this is the one time in my life I'm going to have a chance to really go at this, and so I'm going to take a year out just for training. And people who've taken a year out because they had a sports injury and decided they wanted to look after their kids full-time for a while, people who went back to study. Like, I think there's lots of interesting reasons. It probably makes you quite an interesting person to talk to. Just figure out how it's part of who you are rather than a thing you're trying to excuse. That's the mistake, is to try to be apologetic about it. Just own the choice that you made and talk about it, and talk about what you gained from it.
I bet none of you are going to like this. My advice for individual talent is, I think that building a narrative sounds very, very effective. I think that, does anybody go into job interviews and 100% completely tells the transparent truth about every dumb thing you've ever done? So being willing to, so job titles are a little bit fluid. You're like, well, I was a developer that did 4 or 5 different things. They want a Python developer. I did Python. I was a Python developer. Being able to sort of write that in is something that's generally accepted and fine. I think that depending on why you took some time out as an applicant, either omitting or glossing over that as part of your narrative. And I think that this is especially important. You shouldn't have to do this. This shouldn't be the way the industry works. But especially women coming back from a break, if it's family related, there's often quite a bit of bias around that. Whether or not you want to talk openly about that, or whether or not you want to frame the narrative differently. It's entirely unfair. This is not the way it should be. But the bias against taking time out for a family for women is very, very real. Because I love data, men, you're in this weird, cool space. Statistically, you could take up to 4 or 5 years out of a career break and it doesn't impact your long-term earnings. It's kind of not funny, it's mostly sad. Not that you are fine, but that the damage that women and female caregivers do to their careers by taking time out is real and lasting. So whether or not you want to look at coming into your interviews very honestly, writing your CV very honestly, and hoping you find someone who's magically unbiased is the way you want to go forward, or whether or not you want to say, oh, I took a year out and I was doing some consultancy.
Okay, should we take the question from the middle here?
So with movements like serverless and no-ops around, do you have any advice for folks who write code for operations but aren't developers, like DevOps and SRE?
Sorry, can you...
Do you have any advice for people who write code for operations but aren't necessarily developers?
So I think the tech changes a lot, but the skill set is always needed. Like, if anything, I need more people who can keep stuff running successfully in prod, understand monitoring and operationability much better, and help everybody do that. I think it's very positive that we expect devs to care just as much about the stuff when it's running in production as they did when they were writing the code up front, but I don't think that diminishes the role for ops engineers or DevOps or whatever, whichever our flavor of name is right now. I think it makes the skill set even more valuable. I think there's a difference between the mindset and the skill sets and wanting to be like, no, I need to keep these as like pets, not cattle, servers that sit in this particular data center forever because otherwise my job will go away. I think staying up to date with those tech changes is the best career advice for all of us. Like, all of these things are changing. You can't shout at the ocean and hope the tide doesn't come in. So figure out which things are happening, whether you like them or not, and figure out how to adjust to that. But I don't think there's a future where we don't have any of the folks with that skill set. It's just changing the focus of what the role is day to day. Equally, most of my friends who are sysadmins are pretty happy at not having to manually set up machines anymore. So I don't think it's a bad thing. We're all automating lots of things that we used to have to do manually, and as long as there continues to be more interesting work the other side of automation, then it's okay. Till the robot overlords kill us all, but that's a separate issue.
Sorry, was the advice on getting into ops or? No, cool.
I'm interested, just before we go to Tibbs, to hear Christian's take on that question.
Sorry, we can't hear you.
I'm interested to hear Christian's take on that question.
Christian.
My take is very much similar to Mary's. The core concepts, they're still there. Arguably, the core concepts run through pretty much everything. You're building things that matter. You're building things to satisfy a series of constraints and problems. The exact shape, the exact tools you're using might change, but fundamentally, you still care that the things keep running, the things do the thing they're needed to do, and what that looks like, if you squint hard enough, is very, very constant.
Okay, thanks. Tibbs?
So this is a question from my past rather than my present, so I'm lucky, but if you need to work part-time, I know employers are required to make accommodation if you're there already, but what is your advice if you need to work part-time and are looking for a new job?
Just do it. Like, they're not your mama. You don't own your, like,
Do you mean how do you find
Oh, yeah.
employers who will consider you as a candidate when you are only available part-time?
Oh, sorry. I thought it was the question of, like, what do you do when they've made this accommodation for you? No.
No. So I think find the. I would recognise it's hard. Not every employer goes up front. This job that I'm posting could also be done by two people sharing it, or it could be scaled up or down depending on someone's availability. Generally, it depends what definition of part-time. I think if it's less than 50%, it's much more likely that you should find the companies that say that they're great at flexible working, apply for the role, and just note on your cover letter that's a thing that you're keen on. There are a lot of places that are more flexible than they put on the job spec necessarily, which I know is challenging. And so personally, I'm trying to make sure we add it to our job specs. We say that that's possible, etc., etc. The hardest is the 60%, the 3 days a week. So somebody, almost anybody with a full-time role, they'll consider somebody who wants a 4-day week or an 80% schedule. They'll consider job share of 50% people if they want half schedule. I think the 3 days a week one is the hardest one to do because you probably can't scale the role down well enough necessarily. And then job sharing becomes more, for the company, more expensive than if it were just two people at the same level doing a job share. It depends on your role. I think it's easier for some roles than others. I would just apply and then get through to the, like, it's a conversation for offer stage. It doesn't have to be a conversation for earlier. If you have enough capacity to do the interviews, I would get all the way through to offer stage with a few companies and have the conversations then. I think you can take yourself out of consideration too early. But if you are pressed for time and don't have the capacity to interview lots of places, then I would go more the route of assessing who says that they've got flexibility and questioning that up front when you're doing a screening call or similar. Does that help?
Another thing I'd
Michelle?
add to that is, sorry if I may,
Yeah, go.
is that if remote working is your thing, I believe that continental Europe is a lot more. I've seen a lot more job sharing type things. I've seen a lot more part-time roles, particularly in France and Germany, than I've ever seen in England. There are potentially language issues, there are potentially other issues there, but it's potentially an underappreciated area.
Just thinking about the current role that I'm in with 5AI is we have a disproportionate number of people studying or completing their PhDs. So we do take them for 20% of their time, up to 80% of their time. And what we've learned as a company is we have to double down on our communications and tools that we use to ensure that everyone's up to date and has got the latest, equal access to information if they're not physically in the office, that we're creating a space that similar to a remote working environment, in fairness. And I think the more that AI and machine learning doesn't become a hashtag on every single job spec I seem to be reading right now, it's software. We're going to see more and more of that flexible type working, but I really agree with everything that people have said so far is if you can question it up front because they mention it, then try and do that at scale. Yeah.
Okay, we got time for one last question.
Hi. So I have a reckon, which is that there are some crossover skill sets, which are not normally traditionally associated directly with being a developer, which actually, if you have them, level you up quite significantly in your career and in your ability to function well. So my quite leading question is, are there any quite left field skill sets that if I was looking to become a much better developer and actually move into even just continuing to be a developer, what skills would you recommend I develop that might not be directly technical or directly traditionally developer skills?
Can I take this one
let's go
first?
for
Because
some-
the first person who mentions this, they're just going to get an easy ride, and then it's harder for them. Communication. So succinct communication and not being afraid of putting yourself forward is, I really believe that the only thing holding you back is you. So if that is something, and in the past, I've never been so far down the track as having imposter syndrome, but I do understand that it's hard to put yourself forward. And once you've had a little chat with yourself and taken some coaching on that, the ability to get up and share all of the good stuff that you know and that you want people to know, personally, that resonates with me.
Okay, has anyone else got a quick one to add?
Yeah. Earlier there was a question that contained a question about people with different backgrounds. I love hiring former teachers or former linguists. So these kinds of skills, if you want to develop any skills in training or mentoring, and they're specific skills, being able to teach, someone has to teach you, or any human language skills, I find incredibly useful for both communication and problem solving.
Yeah.
And just pulling into the left field thing, team sports. In all seriousness, been finding a lot that team sports players, they cooperate. It's the cooperation, it's the implicitly willing to trust the other people on your team. It's the being a part of something rather than a lone individual striving in a direction that needs to be aligned. It's that cooperation aspect.
Okay, last question over here on my right-hand side.
Hi. From my interviews experience, for example, when I go to an interview, some interviewers give me like technical tasks first, and like after that there's like a broader conversation, and that makes me nervous. And for example, I had interviews where there's like 10 minutes or 15 minutes is in, and then I can open up better and show myself better. I just wanted to ask, like, what are you do something for a better interviewee experience, and also maybe you could give some advices about that for other interviewers or managers.
So I think the question was, what do you do to give the interviewee a better experience when hiring?
I'll take that one then. Everyone I tend to train up the interviewers and start there and remind them that they're speaking to human beings, and not everyone has the same privilege, either from where they're born or where they've come from or the experiences that they've had, and just to try and get the interviewer to recognise that, so that doesn't come across and affect your performance. I'd probably say I'd start there. So that's not necessarily advice for you, I'm sorry, but that's probably how I would try and stem the problem, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Kate Houston did a great talk about creating empathy as an interviewer, and she, like, one of her bits of advice is look at a picture of something that makes you feel like warmer inside. Hers is a raccoon riding on a crocodile, so we all took away the message of like be the raccoon you want to see in the world from her talk. As an interviewee, I think trust that the reason you're at interview is people would like to work with you. They're not. Seriously, interviews take enough time and are stressful enough on all sides that nobody's doing an interview for no reason. So trust that they want you to succeed and they're asking questions from a place of wanting to know the answer. Yeah. The other total trick is do push-ups against the wall before you go into any of these kind of situations, even if it's in a bathroom stall, because it broadens your chest out, makes you take a deep breath and tricks your body into relaxing even if you won't relax. And so it's a useful kind of physical tip for speakers or for that kind of pre-interview situation. Did we answer your question? I'm worried that
No,
we didn't.
I don't think
It was.
we have.
It's when you guys are when you folks are asking, it's echoing for us from that mic, so I'm finding it really hard to hear what the question is.
It was more about what could you, what advice could you give to managers and interviewers, how to improve
the process.
The process.
Yeah.
So give people do a tech test first, make the in-person tech test build on what people have already done so that they feel safe and able to comment on it. They're talking about the choices they already made when they did it at home. Have a clear set of questions and a structured interview, like Jess said earlier. Make sure that those questions that you're asking are related to the values of the company. They're looking for the things that matter to you. And remember that your job as an interviewer is you're trying to find out whether somebody is not, and I stole this shamelessly from somebody else who I've now forgotten who it was. It's not about culture fit, it's about culture add. You're trying to figure out what this person will add to your culture, not whether they're going to fit with what you already have. And I think reminding interviewers of all of those things matters, but also like somebody should have made sure that the person got a bit of a tour around and a coffee and a sit, like all the normal basic things of make sure someone's comfortable. And remember that they're interviewing elsewhere too, and their experience with you matters a lot. And I think that employee experience starts with candidate experience right at the very beginning when someone's being hired. Did that answer your question?
Okay.
Okay, so if we have one more question that the panelists can answer in one short sentence, then we'll take that. Yeah. Lunch is coming up, so...
So, if not every engineer should become an engineering manager, when do you think an engineer would make a good engineering manager? What are you looking for people going into technical leadership?
So, Michelle was prodding me earlier that I need to do my... So, there are 4 flavors of CTO, okay? Or there are 4 types of very senior technologist role that you can aim for, right? One is the chief scientist. You're still hands-on building stuff for your organization. Tends to be what you have when the core of the company is the algorithm or the core of the company is the technologist. And so there's a route up to being a very senior technologist, which is through principal engineer, staff engineer, or architect, staying hands-on and coding every day. You kind of have to stay very sharp to do that. It's quite difficult to move away and back to that, or certainly to flip-flop between regularly. But I think you've got to figure out whether that is the kind of role that you want. If you want any of the other flavors of more technical leadership, they tend to be a mix of 3 things. Technical strategy, leading a technical organization, so leading the people side of things, and then eventually business acumen. And I think that for Eng manager, Eng director, all the way up through to VP engineering, you focus on technical strategy and technical team leadership or organizational leadership, and those kind of run as a parallel track. You get to a certain point where you're the most senior technologist in the room. There's nobody who knows more than tech than you do in the company, in the organization that you're a part of. And at that point, if you can't also be a great translator for the business or the rest of the organization into what tech can do for us, if you can't understand the balance sheet just as well as anybody else. So I didn't get to my answer to the left field skill set. Don't wait till too late to understand business fundamentals, which I know that makes me sound like some douche bro MBA dude, but like I haven't got an MBA and I'm not a douche bro, and I'm sure some of them are lovely. But like, it kind of matters. I think it's an incredibly. We are in one of the best paid industries that exists, and not caring about where that money comes from or how you're paid multiples of what other people are and how the economics of that works out is not cool. So like in time you have to understand the profit and loss side of things, how the business model is hanging together, what is the growth strategy and how does it work. And I think people who try to get all the way to being very, very senior and then suddenly are like, oh, there's this entire world I completely ignored, tend to struggle. So try and figure out how much of that you need to know at what point. But yeah, there's hands-on tech, technical strategy, leading a tech team or organization, and then the broader business understanding, I think is what matters.
Okay, so lunch is coming up. Thank you very much to our panelists. If you'd like to question them or query them about more things later, you can reach them on Twitter. I think they're all around for the rest of the day. So yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for all the questions.
Thank you, Samathy, for being a chair. Thank you.